at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. We've had Ray Watson here in the studio before, actually, not too long ago.
A
couple weeks ago, talking about things locally here. But Ray has been involved in an issue here that has garnered national attention. Now, this, of course, is over the Poconokeets land in Bristol that I want to talk about how we came to where we are right now. And then we'll talk about the national media play that saw you getting national press for this.
Sure. So, for those who may not be familiar, commercially how tribal nations operate is through what they call a tribal trust. Typically, the types of tribal trusts that are developed are federal tribal trusts, and that's why you hear about the federal recognition process. But in that process, what ends up happening is the U.S. Congress gets inserted as the trust managers for the trust, and the tribe itself becomes the beneficiaries. That was instituted because at the time they felt that tribal nations weren't in a place to be self-sufficient and kind of governing themselves. Of course, it's been a while since that process started, so what we have elected through the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of America and the Poconokeets, our member nation, was to develop tribal trust according to International Hague Trust Treaty standards.
Okay.
So with that bit of context, in 2015, the trusts were given constructive and public notice filed in the particular counties where the ancestral lands were. And then we reached out to the Attorney General's office and a representative from the governor's office, Claire Richards, to inform them that we were operating in this manner, that we had ancestral lands that we were looking to repatriate because that was really what the whole process was all about.
Okay.
And we wanted to work with them to do that. After that initial conversation, communication just pretty much stopped.
With the governor's office and the attorney general's office?
Yes, and I have my inklings why it stopped, particularly with the AG. I mean, of course, he was hiding behind 38 studios. Now we see what's going on with St. Joseph. So that's a side conversation. Pretty much the communication stopped, but we kept attempting to communicate. So we were going around to different departments in the state saying, hey, look, this is who we are. This is how we're operating, and we're ready to move forward.
So let's talk a little bit about that land. You
Sure.
said there's a specific piece of land in Bristol that you said
so
is
they
ours.
they look at it right now. They call it the seat of the Massasoit. It's where the Heifer Refer Museum is. The traditional name of that land is Potumtuck, and that is where the Massasoit, and Massasoit is the Pokanoket term for great leader. So that's where the Massasoit Osamequin, which means yellow feather in the Algonquin dialect. He was the chief who greeted the Pilgrims. He was the chief who signed the first treaty with the English. He was the chief who had the first Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims. And then after that, when things kind of devolved, it was his son, King Philip, whose traditional name was Po-Metacom, who from that place waged the King Philip's War. And then ultimately, when the war had been lost, that's where they captured him in that same area. They beheaded him, they quartered his body, and they sent it off into the different corners of the colonial government. So that is very sacred land, but it's also very historic land. And the Poconokeets had informed Brown and the Attorney Generals that, look, that's sacred to us. We don't want to see anything happen to it. It hasn't been well kept. I mean, there's a nuclear power plant across the bay. We just came across some ancestral graves there that had been desecrated with the alcohol bottle next to it. So if Brown was to be the stewards of it, they haven't really been great stewards of it other than bringing people down there to show off the land.
How long has Brown had that property for?
Oh, 60 years.
Okay.
What the Poconokeets argument is that when King Philip was killed, there was never any contract or treaty signed with any of his lineage to say, this land is yours. And what I actually learned yesterday was that Rhode Island was the only colony that had it in their charter that all Indian lands had to be purchased. So that was in the Rhode Island Charter, which then became the Constitution. So by Rhode Island law, by U.S. law, it's considered a taking without compensation. And that's what our conversation with Brown has been. Now, going back to the Attorney General, it is our position in FANA and also the Poconokeets' position that he had a due diligence to go and tell Brown. Once we told them that this is what the issue is, to say, hey, you all might want to check into the title to make sure it was clean. You might want to at least have a conversation with the Poconokeets to see where they're at. None of that happened. So after being ignored for 2 years, 2 years, Kate, you know me. 2 years is a very, I get up in arms. So
that's a long time.
Yes. So after 2 years, we finally said, look, enough's enough. We have to do something to bring some attention to this. So they lawfully went and repatriated the lands. And that's what we've been at for the past week or so. It took Brown officials about 3 days to get down there. When they came with 5 bags of peaches, which is, very 1700s, 1600s. But from the Sagamore's perspective, they were very delicious peaches, and he appreciated, I guess, the overture. We actually had the opportunity to meet with some officials yesterday again. We are trying to be amicable in this situation, but at the end of the day, the law is the law, and that's what this is really all about. It's not about the poor Indians. It's not about we're angry about what happened 400 years ago and we wish literally, we understand the law better now. We didn't understand it as well as we did before as we do now, so ignorance of the law is never an excuse. So we didn't have an argument, but now that we understand it, now that we're operating correctly, the law should be applied. And this also speaks to the work I do with PCEI. If we stop being afraid of this story, this is a tremendous piece of Rhode Island history that should be acknowledged and shared. I mean, the people that greeted the Pilgrims and signed the first English treaty with the English are right here in Rhode Island. From a PCEI standpoint, that's a tremendous cultural tourism attractant. We should be supporting the Poconokees. They should be blasted all over. When you walk through the T.F. Green Airport, you should see a picture of the Sagamore there with the story, the Indians who greeted the Pilgrims. So when people walk by, I didn't even know this was here. And what's even more heartening on our part is that the Bristol community has been very receptive to what's going on. We're not getting any pushback from anyone but Brown University. So it's a very interesting situation that we're in.
And how many folks here trace their lineage back to the Poconokees?
I think the Poconokees have about 400 people enrolled in their tribal government right now. Of course, the issue is, especially within these lands, because of the King Philip's War, a lot of our people who got sent into slavery into the Caribbean, a lot of them got chased up into Canada. Some of my people being Nahegantits, they're out in Wisconsin. So, we kind of got set in all different directions. And what's great about this is because all of this attention is taking place, you have people now reaching back and saying, hey, I've got some lineage, my people told me. And that's a beautiful thing, in my opinion, to be able to reconnect with your heritage in that regard. So we really want the Rhode Island community as a whole to look at this as a positive thing. Of course, amends need to be made, but it can be made in a way that acknowledges it respectfully and genuinely, and then collectively allows us to work together through these issues to present ourselves as an international model of how you work with indigenous populations, as a way to draw in more cultural tourism, because we know that's something that the state is very challenged with right now. I just got back from Mexico a few weeks ago traveling, and I was just astonished at how well they tell their colonial history right along with their indigenous history. I mean, smack dab in the middle of Mexico is a big statue of Montezuma. And I literally pulled over on this. I made our driver pull over because I needed a picture of it. Why isn't that sort of stuff happening here in Rhode Island?
And so talk with us. When did you get the phone call from Fox News that said, we want you on with Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, so last week it came over. We're working with the Fan Collective, fantastic allies. They actually helped us to raise a lot of awareness, to draw in some national supporters to come in and help us. We're getting the camp up and running and all that. And they've kind of been point for media and all that. So actually it was through Chief Darrell Black Eagle, who got a phone call. He has some connections. I sent it over to the Fan Collective at the camp. They talked it over with the Sagamore, and he said, Ray, I really think that it would be great if you could be point on that. We were supposed to connect last Friday, but then the hurricane came in. So I told them, well, look, if you guys are still interested, I think I could have some time on Monday. And they followed through on Monday, and there I was on Fox News last night.
So talk with us a little bit. I saw the interview. Tucker was asking about the role of Brown. I've seen you head back and forth on Facebook with some folks who said, maybe Tucker had an angle, but you pointed out, haven't talked to CNN or MSNBC or, you're here to talk.
Absolutely. And I always try to take myself out of political arguments and just look at the right and wrong of situations. And as I said last night, I found it completely disingenuous, especially up here in the Northeast, when all of the talk started happening about the statues and the KKK and all that. I'm saying, well, that's terrible stuff, but what about what we're going through right here, and why isn't this ever addressed? And when you look at the fact that at the same time that Brown has its face on the hands of the Indians, not wanting them to speak, they also got their hand out getting money to start a new Center for Racism and Reconciliation. We're saying, what on earth is going on here? So we think that, especially here in the Northeast, if we're going to point fingers at other people, we should first start by addressing the issues that are right here. And it should start with its indigenous populations, because they were the first ones who were affected by a lot of the policies, colonial policies that were put in place. And if you're going to start to make amends, why not start with the first people that were wronged?
And you've got folks there at the land right now. How many
Yes.
people are there right now?
Give or take, we hover around the 40 to 50. You know, people come, people go, tribal members come up. We've had a lot of community members from the Bristol community and beyond just dropping off supplies. We actually had a woman the first day we were up there come by and say, hey, look, my 8th generation grandfather fought in the King Philip's War. I just wanted to come and apologize for it. And she said, you know, a lot of people would say, well, you know, I didn't have anything to do with that, so why should I apologize? She said, but at the same token, I bet those same people, if they have someone in that same time frame that did something fantastic, they're going to own that and talk about how it. She said, so I just think it's the right thing to come and apologize. And our response was, you know, thank you. And it's not about punishing. It's not about wagging the finger. It's not about you did this. But these things happen. They're a part of the history of Rhode Island. They're a part of the history of our people. And there's something that should be acknowledged, and we should be collectively making amends for it because it's a human thing. Humans shouldn't treat humans like that. And if we acknowledge that these things are wrong down south, if we don't like the fact that the KKK are marching in the street, if we don't like the fact that there's all of these police accountability issues going on, if we're going to be so loud and supportive about what happened with the Dakota Access Pipeline, we should also be just as loud and just as genuine and just as up in arms about things that are happening right here at home.
So what now? You've got folks on the land.
Yes.
You've had conversations with Brown.
Yes.
I've seen you sort of take their argument and pick them apart by the
Yes.
different scholars and professors who are weighing in on this.
I mean, they went in far as to say that the Poconokeets weren't a real tribe because they're not federally recognized. I mean, that's really insulting coming from a Brown University. Really, really insulting. And I took particular insult to that because I sent the Native American and Indigenous Studies program a message, because you know how I am, Kate. I sent them a message at 7:18, I think, on Thursday morning. And I said, look, I'm just asking you straight up. Do you support the Poconoke repatriation effort? And do you support all indigenous populations of Rhode Island or just the federally recognized ones? I think at 7:30 that night, they sent an email out to their faculty and staff telling them not to talk to us, not to talk. And I'm like, you know, that's first of all, that's un-Indian. That's not how Indians treat each other. And secondly, that's just lacks integrity. Because if you're going to do that, then reach back out to me and say, no, we don't support you, and we're going to be informing our faculty and staff to not reach out to you. I don't like that, but I would respect that. Because you don't have to agree with us. You can feel how you want to feel, but communication is the first part of respect, and communication is the first part of how you come to some sort of amicable conclusion. And we haven't seen that from the Brown faculty and staff. Now, it's not all of the faculty and staff. We've had tremendous outpouring of support and alumni wanting to know what they can do, students wanting to know what they can do. Really what we saw was a certain narrative trying to be pushed with individuals thinking that they could kind of control the PR element of it. And then lo and behold, I ended up on Fox News, so that's just gone now, you know?
You were there with Tucker Carlson.
Yes.
Check the interview out. If you Google it, you can see Ray there talking, again, with Fox News nationally. So talk just a little bit, as we have a little bit more time here, Ray, you know, about that argument by Brown saying you're not federally recognized. Have there been issues elsewhere in the country
All
where
over the country.
Quote unquote unfederally recognized who have
Yes.
said this is actually our land? Is there sort of case history or case study to point to?
So the real issue has been in the past the tribal trust. If you don't have a tribal trust, then lawfully you can't make an argument that the land should be returned to you because there's no real mechanism to have it returned to you.
Okay.
Nations, states, whatever they be, operate through trust. They take lands into trust. If you remember when the colonists came over, they slammed the flag and this land it's a commercial claim they're making. And once they made that claim, because it wasn't rebutted, it went into their trust. And here they go. That's what the first treaty was, the opportunity to have a commercial right to be on these lands, which the English actually broke when they wouldn't return Squanto over to Poe Metacom after he was lying and, you know, misrepresenting. He was supposed to be, what's the word I'm looking for? So we speak Algonquin, they speak English, translating.
Okay.
He was mixing up the translation, so finally, when they found out, Philip said, I want him over here. Now, you all take care of your people, we take care of ours, and the English said no. So right there, they break the treaty right there. So it's been ongoing since then. But no, they haven't been operating in the capacity that we have, and I think that's probably why the Attorney General's office wouldn't respond to us, because they didn't know how to. And instead of being good neighbors and saying, wow, this is really interesting, we didn't know anything about this, let's sit down and figure this out, they just decided that they wouldn't talk. And here's the most interesting part. They actually tried to bring up the Aboriginal extinguishment that went on a while back, Rhode Island Indian settlement claim. It was when they federally recognized my cousins down South County.
Okay.
Now, that's all domestic law. And what they're telling them is we're not operating under U.S. domestic law, we're operating under international law, so that doesn't deal with us. And at the time, once they heard that, now mind you, there's supposed to be no more of this, Claire Richards asked us if we wanted federal recognition. So right there, I'm saying to myself, well, we must be on to something if you first argued that there's no more federal recognition, and now you're trying to offer it to us. So we have just felt like the Attorney General's office, and in particular Claire Richards, they're just not upholding the law. They're refusing to communicate, and because they're refusing to communicate, there's all of this negative press now in the state, and I think we have enough of that. I think there's already so much negative press that is always focused here in Rhode Island that this would have been a tremendous opportunity to really have some positive press going on, to talking about how they're working with the indigenous populations. After that, I would have gotten my fellowship, so we could have just took it to the next level. I could have went to Mexico, and we made some tremendous connections in Mexico. I could have went to Mexico talking about all of the great work we're doing with the state here. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that, and we're still in the position of trying to convince certain people in the state that this is a narrative that should be told and could be an international interest to everyone.
Now, you mentioned Claire Richards saying to you, do you want federal recognition? Is that of interest or no?
Not at all,
no.
Because the federal recognition process puts you in a subjugative position with the
attached.
Yes, and that's what we see going on with Dakota Access Pipeline.
Okay.
So President Obama says no, you can't do it. Everyone cheers. President Trump comes in and says run it through, and it runs through. We don't want that type of relationship. We want to be able to work eye to eye with these other state and federal governments like we should be as separate nations, because that's what we were when we got here. That's why the treaties needed to be signed, the permission needed to be given, and we always came in a good way. When the Pilgrims were on the shores dying, the Massasoit said, you know what, we can't just let these people die. That's not how our people are. And I think that that might be a part of it. I think people are terrified that the Indians are going to get back of it. We're not like that. That's not in the nature of our people. We do want to be respected. We do want to work with local communities to address environmental issues that are going on. We should have a say if they're trying to put a new liquefied natural gas plant in our lands, whether we think that that's a proper thing to do or not, and because of the impact that it can have on our lands. And that's how I always come across, or at least try to come across. That's definitely how the Sagamore comes across. That's how most Indian nations that I've had the opportunity to meet and build relationships come across. And especially in a time and age right now where we have something like a Trump presidency, and regardless of how you feel, I think everyone should be concerned about his response to what just happened in Houston. I think, politics aside, we should be concerned about the state that this nation is in. I really think that the Indian nations could be a real ally and a real support in helping to get this country back to where it should be, in some balance with respect for each other, getting back to how things were before all of this craziness happened. I really think we could be great resources in that regard.
So we've got the folks on the lands in Bristol. Is this Dakota Pipeline-esque? Are they not going anywhere until a decision's
Well,
made?
yeah, no, we're not going anywhere. And in our opinion, I think that the Rhode Island community should really be putting some pressure on Brown, because really what it amounts to is trying to hold on to stolen property. And Kate, someone steals your car, they sell it to Frank, who sells it to Bob, who sells it to Jim. You catch up with Jim, you say, hey, that's my car, it was stolen. And Jim says, well, I got it from Bob, so no, go take it up with Bob. But the car's yours, right? So that's what we're saying. My suggestion to Brown when we met with them was, perhaps you should actually be going after the state for this, because the Attorney General didn't do his job. And if he had done his job, we would have had this conversation years ago. A couple of years ago, you wouldn't be getting all of this. I wouldn't have been on Fox News talking about this situation. Your professors wouldn't have come out and made the erroneous comment that we're not a real trial. None of that would have happened if the Attorney General would have just done his job. And I'm just going to point to the fiascos that are taking place with him right now to say, I think this is characteristic of how he's been conducting himself while he's been in that position. I'll be bold enough to say that.
Well, all eyes clearly are on the office with, as you said, other issues. And of course, what's going on with the Poconokeets
Yes.
down in Bristol. Well, I'm glad we had you in here. You could have seen Ray last night on Fox News with Tucker Carlson, but wanted to bring him right down here into the studio where we've had him before.
Absolutely.
Have that conversation about what's going on. Of course, we'll ask Brown their take on this as well, but garnering local, international attention, wanted to make sure that we had you in here to give your say. So Ray Watson, appreciate it
Thank
today.
you very much. In our language, Kate, we say Katapatush, which is thank you. We definitely appreciate Go Local for all of the support that they give me personally and for helping to bring some light to this particular
Well,
situation.
glad we could come have you in to tell the story. I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Absolutely.
Okay? We'll let you go around the corner. I'll finish up here in the studio. I think this is my second time in a week on the chairs. It's good to be here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Bring the stories right to you. News and politics. First from Washington, D.C., Jennifer Lawless at American University letting us know what's taking place down there with all eyes right now on Texas, a little bit on North Korea. Steve Rosa in from Adventures. They had a big announcement. They are the agency of record for a Taiwanese company called AOC in Latin America. So how did a Providence-based guy, as Steve said, end up on the global stage, what their next plans are, and of course, national, international attention. Ray Watson talking about the Poconokeets down in Bristol. He was just on Tucker Carlson last night, so national attention here in Rhode Island as he makes the case for why that land, he believes, is